Hey folks, thanks for joining me for this episode of the EmbellishPod. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Hopefully I can be found on any podcasting platform that exists. And if you can't find me on a platform, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com and I'll try to get that taken care of. You can also find video versions of this podcast on YouTube. You can find all of my links on Instagram at EmbellishPod or TikTok with the same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. It's a place to pick up these links, episode details, and more. Today I'm going to be having someone join me from an RTD company called Southside. Meredith is going to hop on and talk about a whole lot of things. And we're going to learn some new words that are present in the prestige beauty industry. And we're going to learn a little bit about RTD gin cocktails. Hope you guys enjoy this conversation. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happen to be consuming this particular episode of the Embellish Pod. Today, I have Meredith Mills-Merritt joining me. And interestingly enough, this is going to be my first conversation with someone that is in the RTD space. And so before we kind of get to that, right, before we get into that particular thing, you've spent a career in a completely different market before you got into spirits. Who were you professionally before you were Southside?
Before this, I was in the beauty industry, more specifically prestige beauty. So you'll hear that as a marker versus more mass. So think about what shows up in Walgreens versus what shows up in Sephora. And so I was doing brand management and product innovation right after I graduated with my MBA. I fell in love with it. It's really what gave me the CPG bug, is what I'll call it. And I worked my way up through a few companies across a bunch of different areas within skincare. But the common thread there was I was used to working with hyper-specific ingredients that would have to be approved by the FDA and didn't really realize just how similar the contract manufacturing process could be for a beauty product and an alcoholic beverage, given all the kind of things you have to take off the list and compliance wise. And so when COVID hit, the team that I was working on at the time was focused on breathing life back into a teenage acne brand, and the brand code and kind of the assignments that I was working on were interesting, don't get me wrong, but I wanted to do something else in addition to that. And so to feed my brain, that's how this whole thing got started. So I was beauty through and through, and now we're in beverage.
As a father of teenage daughters, I'm glad we were able to touch on this because I can be like, hey, I talked to somebody who worked in the space that you guys directly appreciate, because a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old aren't super interested in spirits, but they are interested in
Correct.
Prestige beauty for sure. To kind of go ahead and jump down the path, Southside is what you're doing now, right? And it started as kind of, I guess it was inspired maybe by your mom's cocktail of choice, your mom's summer choice. And it wasn't so much a business idea maybe, but walk me through the moment that this recipe became a business for you.
Yeah. So pretty much as far back as I can even remember, my mom, whose name is Leah, she's been known for her summertime cocktail. And we just called it Leah's, summer cooler. And it was always gin, some sort of frozen lemonade, mint, and honestly, whatever else we had at the lake. I grew up going to the lake in a very rural part of Oklahoma. So kind of once you're there, those are the supplies that you have because you're really not going back into the store. And you can read between the lines, maybe had a sip here and there underage, but it was so delicious and so refreshing and so perfect for hot weather that it was something that I always loved. Fast forward, I meet my best friend in college. I spend every summer with her out east in the Hamptons, and I was introduced to a drink with a very similar flavor profile and thought to myself, okay, well, I have a recipe that has really good ingredients, really easy to make, kind of my like one trick, a thing that I would bring to a party or like a bachelorette watch night kind of thing. And so this really truly became a viable business option during COVID when I was going through the research that I had access to through a class at USC, actually, University of Southern California, where the project was to create a ready-to-drink, but for the class, it had to be wine-based. Thanks to all these fabulous university libraries that have all this wonderful data, I was still able to read some reports on white spirits. So think vodka, tequila, gin, as well as the rise of canned cocktails. This is around 2021, 2020, like true COVID-y times. And so I thought to myself, okay, well, I see that gin is kind of poised and ready for a renaissance, and it was growing slower, albeit than vodka and tequila, but somebody's got to play in the gin sandbox. I
Mhm.
was like, I have a great gin recipe, and I've never seen anything like this in terms of a canned cocktail and what's available currently on shelf. And so, selfishly, as a buyer who would have loved to see something like that with better ingredients, more ingredient transparency, that's gluten free, that kind of just ticked all of my boxes. I was
Mhm.
like, this is worth exploring. And so instead of doing the smart thing, which probably would have been investing in my 401k instead of draining it, I used that to hire a company to commercialize my family's recipe. It was just, kind of down and dirty. It took 13 months. I didn't tell anybody that I was doing it except for my parents and my husband. Not
Mhm.
even my brothers knew. And so once I had the final sample, just in this, simple old aluminum can, I threw together my thoughts, the data, had people try it, and they were like, okay, there's really something here. So it was a very slow burn at first, and honestly didn't really feel super real until that moment.
So I wonder, you have a 13 months development process here, and you have kind of your base recipe. I guess if you can, what was the base recipe as you're kind of tasting through this development, and saying, I'm going to gauge the success of this flavor profile based off of this version that I made at home. Is there a specific, gin that you use? Is there a specific type of lemon or lemonade that you use to say, here's the single source of truth, and here's what we're trying to get to?
Absolutely. So we used a couple different gins, but the common thread there was that they were more floral versus more juniper based. So think like Hendrix, Gray Whale, those types versus Bombay Sapphire, Tanqueray. And that was a huge component because the citrus and the floral plays really nice together. From the lemonade standpoint, when my mom would make it, this was, a long time ago before they were discontinued, she would use those frozen Minute Maid like
Mhm.
can things that you could find for like $1. And then moving forward, I would use fresh lemon juice because that's what I preferred. And I didn't like the corn syrup that was in the other products. And I would also, for the home version, make my own simple syrup. I would add mint to that and just muddle my own mint, really do the whole thing. So every single time a sample came in, to your point, I would make the original version and I would taste side by side. It was never going to be, 100%. I'd like to think actually it is, but because the ABV of the original cocktail was so much higher because you're using, a much higher alcohol by volume percentage gin versus it dialed back to 10%, which is what's in the can. But I was really proud that towards the end, like with the final samples, you were pretty much neck and neck with the original, and like keeping the integrity of the flavor profiles was really important, as well as it's pretty hard to translate certain flavors into a more commercialized beverage, mint being one of them. I think that's what kind of scares people because when you think about it off the bat, you're like, okay, mint Oreo or mint toothpaste, but this is a different kind of mint. It's the more kind of herbaceous, really light touch, not toothpastey at all. And so there were just some dials that we had to keep tweaking, and then we finally got it right.
Yeah, mint is definitely a scary flavor. I was working on a cocktail a month or two ago, and I actually made some mint simple syrup because the recipe called for like muddled mint, but the problem is like every time you go to get a different mint leaf, it has a slightly different flavor, and it way too much variation. Where we were trying to figure out like
Right.
this blackberry bramble needs a little bit of mint to it, but how much,
Yeah.
And so I just backed up and said, hey, let's make a simple syrup out of it so you can standardize it. But enough about me. Let's talk about so you've got this RTD that has a myriad of flavors that are in it. You kind of based off of some mass market gins that were available to you. But when you get to the can, the gin itself is maybe not necessarily a mass market gin. What can you share about, maybe what's inside of this particular thing that makes it a little bit more maybe crafty than it is, standard market affair?
Yeah. So this was news to me when I got into this. Like I said, I had no background in alcohol. So there are actually two different types of gins. You can have a distilled gin, and then you can have a compound gin, which is also known as like the bathtub gin. And so ours is actually a compound gin. And so it's blended when we make the drink with our own specific, flavors, herbs, and extracts right then and there. So for those listening, that was kind of the key difference. A distilled gin, you'll see very specifically on the label that it says distilled. Like that's a key marker of that, where it has a really like deeply integrated taste, sometimes can be more juniper forward, and it's that kind of neutral alcohol being redistilled with the juniper. But both contain juniper. Both are technically gins. Ours is a compound gin. It's a proprietary recipe that we worked on creating together. I was picking, the botanicals, rose, cardamom, things of that sort. So yeah, that's a little bit more about the gin that's inside.
Yeah. And, if the things that kind of make this, there are people that kind of come out into an RTD market and they're just trying to create something to make money off of. And this is a profit making effort, right? This is not UNICEF. You're actually trying to make money. But
right.
when it feels like when you start with a base spirit of gin, that feels more intentional and more connected to you, because it's probably easier if you wanted to start with a tequila or start with a whiskey, because those are really common in the marketplace. And when I go and look at RTDs, there's a whole lot of that out there. I don't see a ton of gin cocktail RTDs kind of sitting on the shelf on a daily basis. As you were developing this, did you kind of bump up against that same thing, or am I way off base here?
You're super correct. And kind of like I touched on earlier, somebody's got to play in the gin sandbox. And if you were looking at what I was looking at, it was going to grow slow and steady. And the reality is, like you said, we have to be competitive. We have to make money. We have to have a viable business opportunity. And so, sure, I could have made this with vodka and it would probably be just as delicious. But would I have been able at a mass market, opportunity, been able to really, make a point? And one of the biggest keys to our success has been that gin spirit base, because we've been approaching distributors and they look at their portfolios and that's an opening that they have. So that's how we've really been able to kind of have this first mover advantage with a lot of other gin based cocktails. There are some out there, don't get me wrong. Cutwater has one, Salt Point has one, you have gin and juice, all that. But yeah, it's been a real blessing that we decided to stay true to not only the recipe, but also our initial hypothesis of, if this pays off, like gin is back in. So
yeah, and I think you identified a trend. At least I get an opportunity to talk to a lot of distillers through the course of this podcast, and many of them are long time they're distilling for whiskey, but one of their favorite things to do is sit down and distill gin, because it's an entirely different set of flavors, an entirely different process for them, and sometimes more fun and quicker to kind of get to the endpoint form. But the thing that I sort of appreciate that maybe the 20-year-old version of John didn't appreciate gin in the same way that the 40-something-year-old version of John did, is that when you put it into a cocktail, it does a couple things from my perspective, and your RTD does this really, really well. A lot of these canned cocktails end up being really incredibly sweet, almost to a sickly point, to where you have to add something else to it once you pour it into a can to try to bring it back to a real world where I don't feel like I'm going to get diabetes drinking it. Gin, having a flavor profile that automatically pulls back from that, feels better for me. It's saying, hey, this is not going to be, it's something that's really, really tasty and refreshing, and it does have a good sweetness, but the gin brings it back down. Do you notice the same thing, or is this just a middle-aged man's palate?
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think what I always tell people is, because we get a lot of feedback, right? That's like, I don't like gin, or, I had a bad experience with gin in college. I'm like, me too. Like, I've been there. We've all been there. Maybe, maybe not. But I say that it is one of the most beautiful spirits. To your point, when you discover a gin cocktail that you really like, I think it's like vodka plus, if you do it the right way. Like, it really opens up the other flavors that are in there. I think, like, for me, a Last Word is one of my favorite cocktails. Super complicated, super delicious. When it's done perfectly, you really can't beat it. Same thing with a Vesper, like a really good Vesper. Those are some of the most fabulous cocktails I've ever had. And I think it requires an open-mindedness to gin, and almost like a formal apology to like your past self that didn't like gin, and just like really kind of going out there, because again, it's a beautiful spirit. It gives you a lot of opportunities. And I feel like if you go to college and, you choose to drink, you're pounding vodka and some of those like bottom shelf, really scary, rums and such. And then you graduate and you're like, what's my next step here? Let me explore gin. So
yeah, I completely agree. And as we get older, our palates kind of change, the things that you enjoyed, some things you'll always enjoy, but you'll open up to new flavor profiles as you kind of get older. And I'm absolutely not positioning it like gin is an old people's drink. It's just one of those things where if you come up to a spirit or a food for that matter that you don't like at 15, try it again at 20, 25, 30, keep trying it because eventually it may be something you like, whatever. But thinking about the Southside cocktail, right? And kind of poking around on the recipe of that. Many of the older versions of this particular cocktail are built off of lime. Kind of when you're building out your concept, did you kind of say maybe we need to test out lime, or is lime maybe a future extension, or you just say this is mom's cocktail, this is what we're making?
Pretty much, this is mom's cocktail, this is what we're making, this is what I know. It's not to say that lime won't make an appearance in the future, because I do think that it's also super complementary to gin, but it's funny because it was such an old recipe and no one could really agree on how it was made or served anyways. It allowed us the, creative liberty of kind of picking our story and sticking to it. And so that's effectively what we did. We were like, okay, if you really lean into the Al Capone era, Chicago, gangland split between the North and South, that South side, you had the citrus and the herbs to disguise it. I was like, let's go with that. It could come out that, sure, it did actually come from the, Long Island Men's Club, but we were able to kind of create a really fun narrative around it.
Yeah, and you should never let the truth get in the way of a fantastic story, right?
Agreed.
And with something like this, right, this is... There are places where, the story is fun and entertaining, and it's not... You're not saying, hey, I have ties to Al Capone, so that's why we're going that way. You're just saying, hey, here's a version of it exists. This right. In many places in the spirits world, not the spirit world. That's a different thing.
Different.
People will say, oh, this is my grandfather's recipe or whatever, and that was probably maybe a little outside of bounds of what people should consider.
Right.
But I like the mention of the South Side of Chicago. I spent some time up there for work on a regular basis. Really love Chicago as a city. But we've got lemon, we've got gin, right? And that's not necessarily everything that goes in there. You did mention some of the ingredients that were a part of your gin profile. And from what I've read and what I understand, you're the kind of person that may get obsessed over ingredient formulation and whatnot. Tell me about that part, right? Because you started with a gin and frozen lemonade concentrate as a base flavor, but then as you start kind of building out how you want this to end up in a can, you're adding extra things in there that you think complement.
Yeah. And I think it also goes back to my research and development background where in a perfect world, yeah, I'd be hand squeezing these and bottling it myself and, having it be the real deal. But when you look at how to commercialize something and then on top of that, how to make it safe, there's a lot of things that you have to additionally consider. And the key things that make a Southside in our minds and in the recipe of my mom's mind is that mint component. Otherwise, it's just like Tom Collins adjacent. And so that was, like I said, a really important piece for us to nail. And then as we worked through the process and as I continued to see, ingredient lists presented, what's in this batch, what's in that batch, we made the decision to only use, real sugar versus any artificial sweeteners because that was my preference. And also we did a simple syrup in the original recipe. So you'll see that cane sugar component there. And then you'll also see citric acid, which is an organic compound. And the reason that this was so important for us is, you're very well aware, is we tunnel pasteurize. That's what keeps this product safe because when it leaves me, I don't know how long it's going to sit on the distributor truck. I don't know if that truck's going to be refrigerated. Probably not. When it gets to the warehouse, then it goes from the warehouse to the retailer, then from the retailer to the shelf, then to your house. And so along the way, because we have a higher juice concentration, lemon juice specifically, I was like, I do not want to run into anything that could make somebody sick. I want to take every precaution possible and also do what is considered the gold standard within manufacturing. That also, of course, limits us where we can contract manufacture. But those were the very specific things that kind of went into this. And, of course, keeping the integrity of the flavor of the original, but also kind of adding those other things in and making those decisions for a number of different reasons.
Yeah. So what what I translated in my brain here is that you're using real sugar and you're doing gold standards of processing instead of using corn syrup and using industry standards. That sounds expensive. It sounds like it may be more costly than what you could be doing and still put out a passable version on the shelf. Is that kind of a part of your brand's identity and saying good enough is not good enough for us?
Exactly. And that's how we've always been, because I'm insane. And it's funny because, to your point, we have stellar margins right now. And so the way that we've done this and the way that we've figured out how to do it, it's not, profitability and better ingredients for us are not mutually exclusive. And so in addition to, that proprietary compound gin, sure, does it cost a little bit more for our cost of goods to do certified organic ingredients? Of course. Did it cost us money after the fact to do the glyphosate testing? Of course. But is that something, like, I'm the type of founder, and I'm not saying that there are founders like this, but I am the type of founder specifically that I was like, I'm not putting anything out there that I am not 110% proud of. That is, it is what it is. And that's what you'll always get, because even going back to beauty, you'd see all these products that were marketed more specifically when you look at anti-aging. This is going to go really deep for a hot second. And there was an ingredient called NAD+, which is like a total buzzword right now.
Mm-hmm.
I know for a fact that NAD+ has a really hard time being absorbed through the skin. It's one of those things that, if anything, you've got to do it as an injectable. And we were touted, there was this one product that was being, getting rave reviews and, oh my gosh, it's the NAD+ that's working. But when you look at the ingredient list breakdown, if you know what I know, it has a really high concentration of vitamin A. So the reason that product is working, despite it saying NAD+ on the tube, is because you have a super high concentration of vitamin A. And that to me really upset me. Same thing with supplements. This organization that I previously worked with also did oral supplements that said that they were pregnancy safe. But one of the ingredients was titanium dioxide at the time, just as a smoothing agent for the color of the pill. There was literally no reason for it to be in there. And so I thought to myself, if this doesn't 100% have to be in the formula, then get it out. And so that's also kind of what you see here too.
Yeah. Well, so you said several things here, and I have to write them down and go back and kind of look at this. You get the NAD+.
Sorry, I dumped on you a little bit.
No. This is perfect. This is I enjoy this level of nerdiness. So just
yes.
And people that listen to and watch this are in the same place I am. They may know absolutely nothing about prestige beauty
right
going into it, but they're going to be glad to learn about it coming out the other side. And if they're not glad to learn it, well, they can hit skip and then move to another part of the conversation, because I want to talk about it. But you labeled off a couple of, one is possibly a positive ingredient, but it's maybe overtouted, and the other one is absolutely a negative ingredient. And these are things that, as a part of your job in prestige beauty, you had to know, and you kind of had to be on top of. And moving into the spirits and RTD and beer world, ingredient lists aren't necessarily a thing the same way they were before. Did you know that before you started? Was this like a surprising thing as you kind of got into it?
I did not know that. And honestly, had you asked me before I got this whole thing started, I never would have, even questioned it or batted an eye. Like last time I went to the liquor store and picked up a bottle of Tito's, did I know that it didn't have a nutrition facts panel? No. And so I always own up to my own, things too. When we first did this, our first production run, like ever, we didn't have our nutrition facts panel or ingredient list. We had it on the website, but we didn't have it on the packaging. And we got so many questions from consumers. And I started to realize, I was like, why on earth would I do this? Like, of course, we're going to put this on the packaging. And so the fact that you are able to not only have all of these like products in disguise, like I think one thing that happens really, really frequently in alcohol is you'll see these flavored malt beverages, which is abbreviated to FMBs, pretending to be like a margarita or a ranch water. And so consumers will buy it because that's what it says on the packaging. And they get home and they realize, oh, it's malt based. There's no tequila in here at all. And so that was one thing I was like, well, this is an easy solve. Like, I've got nothing to hide. Similarly, like, even if you weren't doing something that was organic or had all these, ingredients, like an Oreo still has a nutrition fact panel. Like, so does a Cheez-It. Like, just tell people what's inside. That's like the bare minimum. So yeah, I was shocked. And it's been amazing to meet the other people who've been in the industry longer than I have, talk about it, who've done similar things, who were really proactive about their ingredients, because we all agree we're like, where is the TTB? Like, what is going on? Why has this not been changed yet?
Yeah, it is curious, right? Because and I'm glad you said Cheez It. That's an easy one. Like if Cheez It can put their ingredient list on there, and then a consumer goes and reads it and has absolutely no qualms about continuing to eat it, and we've got a box of Cheez Its downstairs in my house, so I'm not
Love Cheez It.
criticizing Cheez Its, but there's so many things that I have no idea what it is that's in there, and it doesn't scare me away from buying it. What is in any of these other drinks that might concern people from wanting to buy it? Is that what it is, or is it just we don't want one more thing to put on our bottle? It all seems a little bit problematic. So, what's the solution to this?
Well, in a perfect world, the solution would be some sort of regulation treating alcohol just like every other category in consumables, where you, at the bare minimum, have an ingredient list. And not only for people who have like dietary restrictions, but just in general, to your point. And this is a good, kind of segue. So I was so passionate about it. And I actually got connected to another beverage founder who also came from a beauty background. His name's Connor Bedgley, and he is the founder of Father's Beer. They're based in Northern California. We got connected and he had the same approach. So what he was doing to beer is what I was trying to do to canned cocktails. And because we had this beauty background, because we saw all of the, the riding the wave of TikTok through COVID with beauty was crazy, and the self-education of consumers and how important it was to educate on ingredient lists, we were like, what if we started something that really helped push this message forward? We weren't going to go after brands that didn't do this, but we were going to support brands that already did do this. A rising tide truly lifts all boats. And so we created the Clean Alcohol Collective. And so our goal is to encourage that level of change, but also more than anything, just give the consumer the tools that they need to evaluate what they're putting in their body. You run into, kind of like you said downstairs, like I'm gluten-free. Gluten-free Cheez-Its coming out was like the best thing that ever happened to me. And I cannot have them in the house because I will take them down in one sitting. And so to your point, like, I'm not afraid of that ingredient list. I am just glad to know that, like, I know exactly what's in it. And so our request is, even at the bare minimum, just tell people what's inside. That way they can make their own decision. When you come to alcohol, it's funny because they're like, oh, it's not healthy, so why should I care anyways? But I'm like, we don't need to do that line of thinking. Like, it's just as important for you to know what's in it. An example I'll give you is similarly from my beauty days, and that's actually the only reason I knew this, is there are certain, reactions that can happen with artificial preservatives. Mm-hmm. And specifically, there's like potassium sorbate and sodium benzoate. And so specifically, when we were trying to formulate this product, we ran into a contract manufacturer that wasn't comfortable with, how we had our formula. They wanted to add some of those artificial preservatives. Well, because we have such a high concentration of, again, lemon juice, also known as vitamin C, also known as ascorbic acid, those two things have the propensity to create an additional carcinogen, benzene. And there are reports and studies and rumors that the FDA has known about benzene reactions in food and beverage since the 90s. They haven't done anything about it. If you're at the FDA, call me. Like, I'd love to talk to you about it. So just like not pulling a Johnson & Johnson baby powder, for lack of a better example, was what I was really also hyper concerned about.
Yeah. And I think it makes a lot of sense. And you have an industry driven group as opposed to, consumers requesting it and feeling like you're hiding something, because sometimes that's the way the FDA gets involved, is that consumers like, oh, you guys are doing something really nefarious and we want to know more about it. Right. And they go into the industry and industry says, no, we're not going to tell you. You're on the other side of the fence saying, I'm in the industry and I want to tell you what I'm doing. And here's a group of my friends that are the same way. I'm curious, this is a voluntary group of people. There's no enforcement to it. How do I, as a consumer, trust it then, if that makes sense?
We have a very specific no list. So we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. So we looked at Whole Foods Market, Erewhon, all of those natural grocers that already have some sort of ingredient ban or restriction in place. And we took that. To go further for the Clean Alcohol Collective, your formula needs to be at least 90% organic. You don't have to be certified organic, but the ingredients need to come to about 90%. We ask for a ingredient list. We ask for a nutrition panel. And so even if the product, like if it's a new to market product, because we do get a lot of people who've just launched, I ask them to provide their die lines for the next round. So that way we know that they're committed to it and that it's going to be on the packaging if it's not currently. And the no list is honestly pretty standard. It's things that you would, kind of want to avoid anyways. Think, like red 40, high fructose corn syrup, those artificial preservatives I was talking about. And then you go a step further with the natural flavor specifications. And this is something that like Erewhon and I live in Southern California right now. This is something that like Erewhon Market does is you have to submit your natural flavor specifications to make sure that there's no hidden maltodextrin, no hidden non-organic sugars, and no hidden propylene glycol. And so we ask for all of those. And that is how we're trying to get consumers to trust us and being like, listen, there's nobody right now, the TTB obviously isn't. I hope they do one day. There's nobody right now kind of keeping a check or a tab on what's being put into these products. So here's our no list. Like we're presenting to you what we're qualifying as clean versus kind of the blanket clean. Because to your point, that's a completely unregulated term. It was the same way in beauty. So by giving our definition of clean and having them, the brands, sign something that's like, yes, we promise, like that is our handshake. This is the truth. We're making sure that, the bar's not on the floor with these products and kind of, transparency shouldn't be optional. So that's how I would say we've been able to be so successful.
So as a group of organizations, right, would you consider the people that are the brands and the companies that are part of Clean Alcohol Collective, is this more of like a group of boutique or bespoke type brands, or are there some like major, nationwide name brands that are in here? Like, what does the makeup of the organization look like?
The makeup right now is a bunch of smaller suppliers. Some of them have a larger presence. Some of them are only in a few markets. Some of them have been around for longer than us. Some of them are newer. And so that's the beauty of the whole thing. We would love to bring on some larger brands. So we're working on building our credibility, to your point, so that we can approach those larger organizations. We have on our advisory board an individual named Alex Isby, who's actually the director of product development for Happy Dad. And this was something that he was just personally super excited about and passionate about. And he walked us through, when you're a company of that size, because they're massive, here's how this would impact our supply chain. Here's how this would work. We're still they still publish their nutrition facts and ingredient lists, which is great. That's part of the battle. Their formulation is not at a minimum, 90% organic, but how do we, encourage that, even to your point, like with the Cheez-Its of the alcohol world, like with the products that aren't going to necessarily fit the 90% threshold, how do we promote the ingredient transparency and how do we avoid, I'm not going to call like worst practice. And so he has, horror stories of what companies can do and, how it gets hidden and things of that sort. And so we have all these resources, and that's a long-winded way of me saying I would love some big brands to come on. And we approach new brands every week. We ask for, friends of brands to submit themselves, others, you name it. And so it's been a really fun process too, to meet all these different, suppliers. So
yeah, it feels like an easy win for any,
right.
There's a ton of brands out there that are, additive-free tequila or organic vodka or organic gin. Those feel like easy ones for them. Or, up-and-coming, beer brands that are, wanting to do, we kind of bump into the market and say, hey, we're really good, but also we have this sort of differentiation. And it's not that a company not being a part of this doesn't mean that they're not following. It just means they haven't gone through this process, but it is a good, comfortable way to know that. I am curious, if you've got this, existing no list, how does it work out if a company comes in and says, initially they meet all the standards, and then, 2 recipes, 3 recipes down the line, they're sort of out of it, right? Like, is this a thing that you request them to self-police? How do you exit a brand if they do this?
Yeah, we are going to continually ask. So one of the things that we actually specifically call out is like a future commitments box. And that is that all of your formulations must always meet these CAC standards, including any innovation that you introduce. So if you decide to do a new SKU, we expect you to also have it fit the CAC requirements. And it's great because it's something I'm holding myself to in the R&D process. And we also ask for a commitment to testing every 2 years. And so there's a number of different partners that we have just internally. They're not like external facing partners, labs and things of that sort that help us with this mission. And just kind of, if you're not willing to, resubmit your documents, then, we can't continue to advertise you as part of the collective. So
it sounds like, there's a lot of things that go into being a part of this and hoops that have to be, I don't want to say jump through, but that also requires a person to do that. Like, how is this funded? How does this exist? Is this just like your side hobby that you're not being paid for? Like, how does this thing exist?
It is truly my side hobby that I am paying for, which is fine because it's exactly what I wanted. I'm really lucky. I actually forced my husband to quit his job so that he could help me with this. So he actually helps me run kind of the day-to-day, getting the files, doing the announcements, things of that sort, because, I was really excited to start this, realized I may have bitten off a little more than I can chew, but I wanted to treat it, as it deserves to be treated and grow it as it deserves to be grown. And so it's a combination of my wonderful husband, Matthew, and I, with Southsides, retain a PR company in New York, Paul Wilmot Communications. And we sat down and I was like, I'm going to have to adjust your scope. Like, I don't care what you have to drop, but we're going to need to focus on this. And they were super excited about it. And they were actually part of the inspiration because I met them in my beauty days. And so as we continued to have these conversations, it was just so wild to us that the industry's been this way. And so I'm really lucky to have the help. And, my co-founder, Connor, and our other advisory members, Rushi and Alex, they do a great job of bringing in new brands too. So it's kind of like a High School Musical all in this together. And, that trickles down to the other members. And we've also been able to use it as a wonderful referendum and resource for each other. Like, if someone has a contract manufacturing problem, we can come to each other. If someone has a really cool festival that they're doing that they think the other brand should be doing, they make the introduction. Like, it's such a wonderful network. And like I said, no, yes, there are competitive products within the portfolio. Like, there's 2 other RTDs that I would say we probably compete head to head with. I don't care. Like, we're going to all help each other because it raises the same, yeah, and awareness.
Yeah, it feels more collaborative than it is competitive. And the competition should happen on the shelf, not necessarily in, qualifying part of this group. And when I think about this, it feels like you've developed 2 potentially really, really big things. You've got a brand that could blossom into a really large effort, and then you've got this collective initiative that could also do that. Do you see a day where you're going to have to choose between the 2 and say, all right, I'm going to go this direction and I've got to build a structure to run the other side?
I haven't thought that far ahead yet, and I don't know is my answer, but I will keep holding on as best as I can to both for as long as possible. And even, to your point, I tell my husband, I'm like, maybe you should go get a law degree. Like, we need someone who really understands alcohol from the legal standpoint, because it's something that you want to just feel encouraged and passionate about. And so I'm comparing it to Legally Blonde to Bruiser's Bill. I'm like, let's Bruiser's Bill the alcohol industry at some point. So I think it will be something that I'm always passionate about. I am, like I said, a psycho when I go into stores and look at products, and that'll never change. So that's my answer for you.
Yeah, and I said that because I was looking at some growth metrics, and your shipment growth is pretty huge right now. If the numbers I read were correct, and you're a single product company, you're growing currently a single product company, and that is not diminutive. That is just saying having that kind of growth with one SKU is very, very impressive. And I'm kind of pivoting a little bit back towards talking about Southside. What's the first thing that breaks when you start scaling up? Because you are scaling up. You've got supply chain, you've got cash, you've got human capital. What's the first thing that's breaking down as you're kind of growing?
I would say we've kept our team really small. It's still mostly me, myself, and I. I have some wonderful consultants that kind of come in and out as needed. But when you get that big, you lose your ability to pay as much attention to just 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 markets. And so now that we're in over 20 markets, we have to just be super dialed on what we're doing, because it is so easy for that to get out of control. Anything from tastings to, events, you name it. We have to have a plan for everything, market specific, distributor specific. And so it's really easy. If you take your eye off the ball for a second, It is really easy for things to get messed up, especially because you're also communicating through so many layers. So my communications to the distributors are different than our company's communications to the consumer. And to your point, we're growing at a rate that I am so grateful for and that I hope continues in the same fashion. We've grown, the month of July was our best month ever. We grew 456% compared to last year. 6-figure month for us, which is so exciting. And you can tell that velocity is accelerating and that your foundations are working, but you're also like, okay, I have to really hone in now. And sure, this is all great news, but it's also really scary. So.
I got a couple different ways I could go here, and I'm going to pick this one. So it feels like the Southside canned beverage is very, very well catered to summertime vibes for most of the nation. Is your sales cycle currently cyclical enough to where you're getting to the time of the year where maybe you're going to drop into kind of a horseshoe shaped pattern where you get, Southern California and then the southern states are the ones that kind of drift through the wintertime? Or do you see, maybe you can't even project because you have had such incredible growth, but I guess what would you expect to happen as you roll into December? Do you think sales are going to continue to grow, or you think you just kind of slow down a little bit as everybody gets cold and wants something spicy?
We absolutely account for the fact that the warm months are our, when you make your straw hats. And so through Q4, October, November, December, you hit the nail right on the head. Southern California, Florida. I mean, those markets that do stay pretty warm through just about Thanksgiving are where the majority of our sales will come from in that time period. Then as you get back to spring and summer, you'll see little bits and bobs of the Northeast kind of sparkle back open. And, not funny enough, Vermont is one of our best states. Mm-hmm. And so we like to support them as much as we can, but we also acknowledge, okay, you guys are moving into fall here pretty soon. So we do have to account for that. So I would love to see it even out a little bit. But to your point, this is a seasonal product. It's great for warm weather. And I have actually taken it skiing and it is delicious, but you know what I mean. So yeah, you hit the nail on the head.
I mean, there's always an occasion for a cold beverage, but we're getting into pumpkin spice latte season, and so folks are going to start pivoting what their flavor profiles happen to be a little bit at a large scale.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I thought of is the RTD canned cocktail space is very crowded. The consumer that's in a liquor store purchasing them isn't necessarily trained to look for the ingredients list on the back.
Right.
If you're in a grocery store where you're able to pick up an RTD, you might think about it because, your can of Coke might have it, or your Red Bull, or whatever other poison that you happen to be consuming that's sitting on the shelf. You look at the back of it and then make your decision anyways. How do you position yourself in a place where they're not necessarily looking for those things to either make them apparent or find another way to attract their attention?
10% ABV. I mean, that's really where we come in strong. Is I wanted to create, I'm going to call it an efficient drink, because just from a personal standpoint, I was tired of, feeling like I had to drink, 5 or 6 of something at 4 or 5% versus 1 at 10%. And so that's really, again, like true, like liquor store, that's where we are really, really competitive. And then our price point also signals to consumers that we are a little bit more premium. So we fall into the super premium category, which I believe is anything over like $12.67 is how it was last classified. And that segment has been growing the fastest within these RTDs now. And so it's up about 21% since 2021. And so I think that's great. And it was just something that I was like, again, I came from a beauty background. I was like, I know that my margins are going to get obliterated. Like, we're in this business to make money and be sustainable. And it goes into the pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered. Like, how can we keep as much margin as possible, not alienate the consumer, but also signal to the fact that we do have better sourcing practices and things are going to be a little slightly like $1 or $2 higher because of that.
Yeah. And I wonder, when thinking about the premium RTD shelf, is there anyone else in that area that's competing at the same price but the same ABV as well? Because you could easily do some, efficiency math and say, yeah, okay, you're on the premium shelf, but if you break it down by alcohol volume, maybe the pricing isn't as premium as it is considered because it is higher, right?
Yeah.
have to have one for every two that other ones are having.
I think going into this, I thought that we would only be compared to other gin-based SKUs. That's not the case. We're compared across the board. And so even off the premium shelf, like people are still comparing us to a High Noon or some of those things that are just completely different. And so it's hard to say, but I think when you look at straightaway cocktails, Tip Top, those are the ones that come in kind of that smaller format, but they're higher ABV, similarly priced though. So in terms of price, you kind of have that there, but it's either 40% ABV or us at 10%. And then from the other side of things, 10%, you have, Cutwater has a gin Collins that's at about 9%. So very similar to us. And their pricing is, again, slightly lower because they can. Same thing with Salt Point. They have a gin highball in a can, similar ABV, similar price point. So I love when people say that they don't have a competitor. I'm like, you always have a competitor. Like, I never thought that I would be competing again head to head with High Noon because I told people up front, I'm like, no, we're not going to do that. Turns out you are. And so I think that for us, to your point, like it's so different, especially at every liquor store. I mean, sometimes too, depending on the retailer margin, you could end up on shelf at a price point that you're like, what the heck happened here? And so it's always a fun time.
Yeah, at least in a three-party system like we have in the United States, you often don't get to pick who your competitor is. The consumer is going to pick who your competitor is based off of what they perceive to be value and flavor and a whole host of things. And I don't have a super ton of experience with RTDs aside from just what's in the cooler that someone else happened to purchase. But whenever I was able to kind of set the can down on the table and kind of go through it with my wife, and I sat down, we were like, hey, let's try this. We both kind of came up the other side of saying, I like this because it isn't what other things are, as far as you mentioned it, lower alcohol proof. But the other side of it, and you said efficient, I just don't like to pee that much, right? And so if I drink 3 or 4 of them, I have to go to the bathroom a lot.
Yeah.
If it's 1 or 2, it's a lot better of a game. But the fact that it's using gin as a flavor profile stands up without having to have significant proof to do that in a cocktail. You don't have to be at 40% in a cocktail with gin to be there, and it's not super duper sweet. But that's just me, sticking it in the fridge and cooling it down. If someone goes out and buys a Southside, is that it? They just cool it down, or should they be doing something different, like add something to it, a little bit of this, a little bit of that? What's the right way to consume this?
My favorite thing to do, because each can do about 2 glasses worth, is put it over ice. I mean, yeah, of course, put it in the fridge, drink it cool. It's just as good straight out of the can. But because you have that higher ABV and because it does kind of have that cocktail-y mouthfeel, it is so much better in a glass with ice. If you really feel fancy, I say put a little lemon wheel on there, throw a sprig of mint in there. You'll feel like you've bartended for an hour. And that's my preferred way to serve a Southside. If you want to add some alcohol, you can top it off with your favorite, dry Prosecco or champagne, which is really nice because it adds some bubbles. So from a formulation standpoint, we're the lowest level of carbonation that you can be. So if you do like something that's a little bit bubblier, you can do that. Or in the summertime, I tell people if you want to dilute it, you can add it to black tea for like your spin on an Arnold Palmer. So it's actually a lot more flexible than I thought it was going to be when I was creating it. But it's all, happy accidents.
Yeah, I can see an incredible amount of versatility. I mean, lemon does a lot of different things, especially in the cocktail world. And so I was talking to a lady from Italy a couple of months ago that makes limoncello. And, the number of things that they do with it as well is just, there's a lot there. But, lemon and gin, and it's fantastic. So we're right at the edge of time. I do, is there anything I haven't asked you that you wanted to talk about that we haven't had a chance to touch on yet?
Honestly, no. I'm just so grateful for the opportunity to share the story and letting, you let me nerd out on the ingredient piece, which is great. And that's what I get super passionate about. So, oops. And yeah, no, just again, really grateful for the opportunity.
Yeah. No, I mean, I like learning new words. I like learning new things, and this is fantastic. Kind of the last thing that we always want to touch on, where do we find Southside? Are there any events or anything we should be looking for? I know it's on the back end of probably the season where events might be happening for Southside, but how do we find you?
You have your best bet of finding us in your local retailer, but check our website first, drinksouthsides.com. That has our up-to-date map. I update it myself, so it's my favorite thing to do. And for events, if you are in Louisiana or South Florida with football season picking up, we are a proud partner of LSU Athletics and the Florida Panthers. We have a lot of really fun stuff planned for the sports season ahead. Otherwise, you can connect with us on social at Drink Southsides.
So we've got the connection points. The Go Tigers fans will love to hear the fact that you've got some stuff going on in Louisiana. And, that's a year-round destination for
True.
a nice trip it is. We took a cruise out of there for our honeymoon. We got married in late December, and it was swampy then. And so it was nice and warm, perfect environment for it. So, Meredith, thank you for hopping on and giving me some time today. I know there's a lot of things you can do to kind of, push the needle a little bit on making sure you get things, right in your business. And I'm glad you were able to give me some time today.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Embellish Pod. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform you're consuming this on. Leave a comment if at all possible. Hit me up on social media on TikTok or Instagram using @EmbellishPod, and you can give me a follow so you can keep up with what's going on here. I can also be found at www.embellishpod.com. It's all of my links, accounts, contact details, some articles, a whole bunch of fun stuff over there. Thanks for stopping by.